It's once again time for me to put different Trackmania players into a different tier list for you to have a better understanding about who you should look after once you're watching Trackmania Grand League. If you are someone a casual fan, it's hard to look into a race where it's 16 players to know who is the favorites, who is likely to be on a podium, who should I predict to make it into the playoffs, and who is the underdogs, who is the players that can be good but nobody expects to actually do good. I did a tier list for last season of Trackmania Grand League. It ended up being popular, so I thought, why not do it again? It seems like this is something that people like, and I still haven't had any enemies from the players for actually putting them into a tier that maybe they don't agree with. Quickly run through the different tiers. The tier 1 is gonna be can win it all. Essentially a player that you predict to win this one. If he wins Trackmania Grand League, you're not gonna be surprised. If he ends up on the podium or below, you're gonna be somewhat disappointed for him not winning it. Likely on the podium is gonna be a player that you predict to be on the podium. But if he wins it, then you're gonna be more surprised if he wins it than if he ends up on the podium, and you're gonna be more surprised if he actually doesn't get on the podium but just get into the playoffs. Likely in the playoffs is gonna be then who is likely to qualify into the playoffs, who would you not be surprised about seeing making the top 8 from the group stage. But if he gets above that, then you're going to be surprised. Make or break is essentially what this says, is a make or break player. A player that I have a hard time actually predicting if he's going to be on the podium, if he's going to win it, if it's going to be going down to the Open Grand League. Essentially a player that can end up anywhere. Then the last one is the underdogs, who doesn't have any pressure on them, who is essentially coming into this league with everything else than just playing is a bonus. So if he qualifies into the playoffs, that is already a bonus. If he makes it into the podium, that is even a bigger bonus. And if he actually wins it, then that is going to be probably one of the biggest surprises in Trackmania's history. We have 16 players in this season of Trackmania Grand League as well. 2 new players, that being Mudda and Link, and then we had said goodbye to Matt and Yannick. The other 14 players are the same from the last tier list, if you remember that. So let's go into the list. I will quickly talk about each and every player, but not too much, because I don't think this video should be too long. We start off with Evan. He was somewhat close to making it into the playoffs last season. I put him as an underdog, I think, last season, but he actually played better last season than he did in the Winter 2020 season. So I will actually put him, for now, at least, I will put him likely in the playoffs. I will not be surprised if Evan is actually going into the playoffs now, because I think he's going to improve for every season. So if he improves this season as well, he's likely in the playoffs. Papu is probably the most underestimated Trackmania player out there. Last season, I believe I put him likely on the podium, and I'm going to put him likely on the podium this season as well. The thing about this playoff system is that everybody can win it, and everybody has a chance of winning it, because it's somewhat more random than cup mode. So you can have a good day, and one of the sort of essential favorites can have a bad day, and then you beat them. So it takes less for the top 5 players to beat the top 1 player in this playoff system. So, but I will still say that Papu is likely to be on a playoffs instead of, like, if he wins it, I'm not gonna be really surprised, but I will be less surprised if he actually ends up on the podium. Afi is a guy I put at the underdog last season, I believe, here, simply because that was his first season in Trackmania Grand League. And I mentioned that I had high hopes for him, but I didn't feel confident about saying where it would end up. Afi ended up top 5 to 6, I believe. So I will put him as likely in the playoffs. I see him as a contender for the podium, but if he ends up on the podium, I would be positively surprised. I mean, he can do it, everybody can do it, but I think it's more likely that he will end up in the playoffs. Let's talk about Mudda, the first Australian player ever to play in Trackmania Grand League. He won Open Grand League, essentially the league where he qualified into the Trackmania Grand League. It was a solid performance. It was not a question. After like step 2, you could sort of say that he is going to qualify into Trackmania Grand League. But Now he's playing against the best of the best in the world. He's playing against people who has been at the top level for 10 years now. So it's hard to put him in here because I don't know where he will be. He's probably the biggest question mark for me. So in some way I should put him as make or break, and in some way I should put him as an underdog. Because he doesn't have any pressure on his shoulder, at least from the public eye, I believe. I don't think people actually expect him to go in here and climb a podium spot or even climb the title itself. But I believe he has a good enough skill level to be a make or break player. He can go straight down to Open Grand League, but he also can be up there as a potential playoff candidate, as a potential podium candidate. I don't know. He has a different skill level than other people have. So if he's lucky with the maps in the playoffs, or if the maps are suiting him, we have no idea where Mara will end up. Bren I put as a make or break player last season. I'll put him as a make or break player for this season as well. I still don't feel confident about putting him where he actually belongs, like as a podium candidate, as a winner candidate, because it doesn't really feel as Trackmania Grand League is maybe as good as we thought for Gwen. Hopefully, he will prove me wrong and actually be a make instead of a break player, but last season he ended up in the combine, essentially not top 8, and he did that in the Winter 2020 season as well, so I cannot put him anywhere else simply because the 2 last season has not been the most solid for Brent. Next one, Kappa, winner of the beta season. Last season I put him as a can win it all because Kappa's skill level and Kappa's peak performance is good enough to beat the best of the best players if he has a good day. Still not sure where to put him, make or break. I think it would be a suitable level for him because he can, like I said, he can win it all, but in some ways it wouldn't be that surprising if he doesn't make it into the playoffs. He's one of the guys that benefit the most if there is an offline event. I think he is the guy who gets the most motivated for that in playing in front of a crowd. But I'm going to put him as a likely candidate on the podium for this season. I would be surprised to some extent if he wins it. I would not be like really shocked because it's Kappa, he has won it before, but I would feel less surprised if he ends up on the podium. And if he's below podium spot, then it's going to be a disappointing season for Kappa, like it was last season, at least in my eyes. Next one is Gwen. The guy who was the closest to winning last season, ended up placing second. He won the group stage of last season. Last season I put him as a can win it all. He was one of my 4 winner candidates last season, and I will put him here as well. It's stupid to put Gwen anywhere else than a winner candidate in a Trackmania event at the moment. If he is on the start line, then he is a winner candidate. And he seems to be improving for every season that goes and for every month that passes. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if Gwen wins this. Next one, Scrappy. Scrappy didn't make it into the playoffs last season, but he was second in the last winter season. So where do you put him besides make or break? He's like essentially the definition of a make or break player. He's on the top tier of make or break because he has the skills to be on the podium. He has the skills to maybe even win it all, but he also seems to be a guy that can end up pretty fast in the combine and not make it into the playoffs. Aurel was so close to not making it into the playoffs because he was unlucky and lost a lot of points, but I still believe that Aurel will end up in the playoffs. And I do think that he is more likely to end up in the playoffs than, let's say, Evan, but I will feel less confident than Afi. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if Aurel makes it there, but I don't see him making it into the podium as likely as Papu and Kappa, but everything can happen in this playoffs format. Riolo was second in the last Winter 2020 season in the group stage, so he should be likely to make it into the playoffs. But last season was really disappointing for Riolo. It didn't feel like it was Riolo playing it. I know he had some personal issues there. He also moved into a new apartment, so there were outside circumstances that affected his performance. Uh, he says on his streams when people brings it up and when actually I listen to it is that he feels that this season everything is better, so then he should be likely in the playoffs simply because this format of actually playing consistent in the group stage suit him so well. Uh, so I have a hard time because I think he can be sort of. I don't think he's gonna win it all because this playoff format is not suitable for him. I don't think he's likely on the podium as well. Um, it's actually a hard one to actually put Riolo there because I'm going to put him as a likely podium or likely playoff candidate simply because he is so good in the group stage if he is on his normal self. But then again, I don't think this playoff format suits him as good, but we haven't seen Riolo in this playoff format yet, so who knows. Spam, same sort of list as Riolo. I would put him actually there. Uh, Spam is really consistent. Spam is known for being consistent. Spam has somewhat had no problems making it into the playoffs. He's making it into the playoffs out of beta season, the winter 2020 season, and the fall 2020 season. So Spam is actually a really solid bet for just making it into the top 8. But then we saw last season that this sort of problem that is brought up with Spam that he's simply not fast enough. He's not like on the same pace as Kappa and Gwen. If Gwen drives a normal round and Spam drives a normal round, Gwen is gonna have a higher pace. So I sadly don't think this format suits him as good as a cup mode, and I don't even think cup mode gives Spam sort of the fair sort of look upon his skills because I think he's actually underrated. Massa. Massa is a hard one. Massa actually improved a lot from winter 2020 season to fall 2020 season. He was so close to making it into the playoffs, and if Massa was in the playoffs, who knows where Massa would end up. So it's hard to put him at one of these three ones because if you say Massa is going to be in the playoffs, sure. If you say that Massa is going to be on the podium, sure. If you say Massa is going to win it all, sure. If you say Massa is not going to be in the playoffs, sure. So Massa is even a bigger make or break player than Scrappy. Massa can win it. Massa has the pace to win it, but Massa also has the sort of tendency to end up outside the playoffs and outside like the top spot. So he's a make or break player. Pack, I put him as a winner candidate last season. I believe he ended up third in the Trackmania Grand League last season, but then if you look back at the last season that took place in the winter, that being winter 2021, then he was not even in the playoffs. So I don't feel that confident about putting as a winner candidate as I did last season, because then I got the impression that Pack actually had a lot of time to actually play Trackmania. Now we know that the people who actually study, the people who have exams, they might sort of collide with the Trackmania Grand League. How much time do they have to actually put in computer games? So once again, a player that I put as a make or break player. He can win it all because he has the skills to do it, but he can also ends up being outside the playoffs that we saw last season. Or I'll change my mind. I think Pack is actually likely to be on a podium. Pack is actually likely to be on the podium. I think even if he has little time, he will find enough time to be in the playoffs. And playoffs are only taking place on one day, so that should be good enough for him to actually be on the podium. But it's hard. It's hard to actually put him somewhere. Link, a new player. I don't expect much from him. I have underestimated Link in the past. I didn't predict him to actually make it into Trackmania Grand League, but he proved me wrong. But I don't think he has a lot of pressure this season, so I'll put him as an underdog. Simply because anything else than just playing in Trackmania Grand League would be a positive surprise for me. If he makes it into the playoffs, really happy for him. If he makes it into a podium, insane. And if he wins it all, then 2021 might be an even weirder year than 2020. But I'm curious to see what Link can do. People on my Twitter actually predicted that Link is going to do better than Mura, so who knows? Maybe he will. Maybe he will actually be like Afi from last season that essentially ends up top 5. Next one, Twin. Announced as an Orgless player for now. Didn't make it into the playoffs last season. Ended up 7th in the Winter 2020 season after getting knocked out in one of the saddest ways I've seen in the Trackmania tournament. I'll put Twin as an underdog. I don't feel confident about saying that he will be in the playoffs. I wouldn't be really surprised if he's in the playoffs, but I will put him as an underdog for now because I don't have too much expectations for him. But maybe he's a make or break player, but I'll put him as an underdog for now. Last one, if you have followed this list and if you're counting, you know that only one player left, and that is CarlJr. CarlJr or Gwen. One of these is going to win it. I will actually be surprised if someone else than CarlJr. or Gwen wins this season, and that is why I've gone from 4 as a winner candidate as I had last season into now just 2. I see them as a level above the rest at the moment. That being said, that this playoff system is, like I mentioned, less favorable for the actual best players, that is having an edge over the others, because you can have a good match or a good map rather, and then you're essentially qualifying into the next round, and you can be 8 times second in a round or in a match and you're out. So it's hard. Am I happy about it? Sure. CarlJr. Forgot to say that. Sure, he won the last season. If you don't recall that, he won the Winter 2020 season as well, in the most dominant performance I have ever seen in a Trackmania tournament. Now he's getting challenged by Gwen, so it's curious to see who is actually the best candidate here. Is it a CarlJr? Is he gonna be enough motivated to play like Gwen? Because I think Gwen's motivation is gonna be there, because this is still somewhat new to him. This is second season, while CarlJr. has been at the top level for now. He was 3rd in the World Championship back in 2012, so that will be 9 years ago. So it's curious. I never gonna underestimate Carl. I will still put him as a 51% favorite towards Gwen's 49, and then you have the rest of the players. So yeah, that's it for my list. If you want to watch the Trackmania Grand League, you can do so by going into Trackmania on Twitch itself. There will, as far as I know, be the same system as last season. That meaning that we will have 16 different players and then 16 different casts. Quickly reminder, I will not cast this season of Trackmania Grand League simply because I'm not backing a system where you are sort of backing one player and you're sort of pushed to being biased. I mean, you can be objective, but in the back of your head, you are going to be somewhat biased simply because you have a contract with an org and then you have a closer relationship to a player that you are supposed to follow. But enough about me. Now it's time for you to actually comment. Is this tier list correct? Who would you change? Did I get someone horrendously wrong? Do you see anybody else than CarlJr. and Gwen winning it? And what do you think of the new 2 players, that being Mura and Link? Feel free to comment, feel free to tag me on Twitter with your ranking, and maybe there will be more Trackmania videos related to Trackmania Grand League on this channel, and maybe I'll do more sort of tier list if you like it. But that is for now. See you on Twitter, see you on YouTube.